Music in ancient Greek, life and thought. In Greek mythology, music had a divine origin. Its inventors and earliest practitioners were gods, demigods, such as Apollo, Amphion, and Orpheus, and their music had magical powers. People thought it could heal sickness, purify the body and mind, and work miracles. In the Hebrew scriptures, similar powers were attributed to music. We may recall the stories of David curing Samuel's madness by playing the harp. That's in Samuel 16:14-23. Or of the trumpet blasts and shouting that toppled the walls of Jericho. The few surviving examples of ancient Greek music comes from relatively late periods. Among the complete works, or substantial fragments, that survive, we have the epitaph of Sikelos, a drinking song from about the 2nd century BCE, inscribed on a tombstone. From this and similar examples, and from what was written about Greek music, we may guess that it resembles music of the early Christian era. It was primarily monophonic, that is, melody without harmony or counterpoint. But instruments often embellished the melody while a soloist or an ensemble sang it, thus creating heterophony. Greek music, moreover, was almost entirely improvised. Its melody and rhythm were intimately linked to the sound and meter of Greek poetry. Makes sense? Go based off of language. Despite the similarities between Greek and early Christian music, we have no evidence of any continuity in practice from the earlier culture to the later one. Okay, Greek theory. By contrast, Greek theory profoundly affected the music of Western Europe in the Middle Ages. From the ancient philosophers and theorists, we know much more about Greek musical thought than about the music itself. Interesting. Philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle wrote about the nature of music, its place in the cosmos, its effects on people, and its proper uses in human society. Greek theorists from Pythagoras, ca. 500 BCE, to Aristides Quintilianus, 900 years later. Aristides Quintilianus. Aristides Quintilianus, 900 years later, not only discovered numerical relationships between pitches, but also developed systematic descriptions of the materials of music and the patterns of music composition. In both the philosophy and the science of music, the Greeks achieved insights and established principles that have survived to this day. Here we will discuss only those that were more characteristic of and important for the later history of Western music. We will also discover that the word music has a much wider meaning to the Greeks than it has today. Interesting. Music and number. Pythagoras and his followers taught that music was inseparable from number, which was supposed to be the key to the entire spiritual and physical universe. According to legend, Pythagoras discovered the ratios of certain musical intervals when he heard hammers of different sizes pounding on an anvil in a blacksmith's shop. More likely, he observed that when a vibrating string was stopped, held fixed in the middle, and thereby divided into lengths expressed by the simple ratio 2:1, it produced a sound 1 octave above the open, unstopped string. Similarly, the ratios 3:2 produced a fifth, and 4:3 produced a fourth. Musical sound, then being controlled by number, reflected the character of the human soul. See window pages 14 to 15. Music and poetry. The close union between music and poetry is another measure of the Greeks' broad conception of music. For them, the two were practically synonymous. Plato, for example, held that song, melos, was made up of speech, rhythm, and harmony, which he defined as an agreeable succession of pitches in a melody. Lyric, poetry, meant poetry sung to the lyre. The original Greek word for tragedy incorporates the noun ode, the art of singing, many other words that designated different kinds of poetry, such as hymn or musical terms. In the epitaph of Sikelos, referred to above, the musical rhythms of each line of the poem follow the text rhythms very closely. And if we knew the correct pronunciation of the ancient Greek verses, we might well discover that the contours of the melody match the rising and falling inflections of the words. The doctrine of ethos. Underlying the doctrine of ethos, the Greek word for character, is the belief that music possessed moral qualities and could affect a person's character and behavior, because of the Pythagorean view that the same mathematical laws governing music operate throughout the cosmos. The human soul was also thought to be kept in harmony by numerical relationships. Music then could penetrate the soul and indeed the inanimate world. The legendary musicians of mythology, it was believed, owed their ability to perform miracles to this power of music. Closely related to the doctrine of ethos is Aristotle's theory of imitation, which explains how music affects behavior. This is the theory of imitation. Music, he writes, imitates, that is, represents the passions or states of the soul, such as gentleness, anger, courage, temperance, and their opposites. Music that imitates a certain passion also arouses that passion in the listener, and so habitual listening to music that stirs up ignoble passions, for example, warps a person's character. In short, the wrong kind of music makes you the wrong kind of person. And the right kind tends to make you a better person. Aristotle argues, for example, that those being trained to govern should avoid melodies expressing softness and indolence, and should listen instead to melodies that imitate courage and other similar virtues. Music in education. Both Plato and Aristotle believed that a public system of education that stressed gymnastics to discipline the body and music to discipline the mind would create the right kind of person. In his Republic, written about 380 BCE, Plato insists that these two educational components must be balanced. Too much music takes too much music makes a man effeminate or neurotic, while too much athletics makes him uncivilized, violent, and ignorant. Plato recommends two modes, styles of melody, Dorian and Phrygian, because they foster the passions of temperance and courage. He excludes other modes from his ideal republic and deplores current styles that rely on too many notes. Wow. It's jokes. Me too. Scales that are too complex, and the mixing of incompatible genres, rhythms, and instruments. He disapproves of changing established musical conventions, saying that lawlessness in art and education inevitably leads to license in manners and anarchy in society. Aristotle on the Politics, circa 330 BCE, is less restrictive than Plato about particular modes and rhythms. He holds that music can be used for amusement and intellectual enjoyment, as well as for education. But he also believes that music is powerful enough, especially in combination with drama, to arouse certain emotions like piety and fear in people, and thus to relieve them of those same emotions through a process similar to medical purgation or catharsis. Music and politics. In limiting the kinds of music they would allow in the ideal society, Plato and Aristotle showed what they disliked of Greek musical life, including orgiastic ritual rhythms. I think I've heard those from the Roman ones. Elaborate instrumental music, and professional virtuosos. These philosophers appreciated the great power music held over people's intellectual and emotional well-being. In later centuries, the Church Fathers also warned regularly against certain kinds of music. Nor is the issue dead. In the 20th century, dictatorships, both leftist and rightist, attempted to control the musical tastes and activities of other people. Educators and many ordinary citizens today still express certain concern about the kinds of music and pictures, lyrics, and performances to which young people are exposed. Interesting. The harmonic system, the Greek discipline of harmonics, or the study of matters concerning pitch, laid the foundation for our modern system of music theory and its vocabulary. Concepts such as notes, intervals, scales, and modes were defined and explored by Greek writers including Aristarchus and us around 320 BCE, harmonic elements, and Cleonidas, who lived some 500 or 600 years later. Intervals such as tones, semitones, and ditones, brackets thirds, were combined into scales. Certain intervals such as fourths, fifths, and octaves were recognized and consonant. Tetrachords. The scale's principal building block was the tetrachord, made up of 4 notes spanning the interval of a fourth. Theorists recognized 3 kinds or genera of tetrachord: diatonic, chromatic, and inharmonic. The last involving intervals smaller than a semitone. Such variety allowed for a broad range of expression and many different nuances within melodies. Early Christian writers about music transmitted some of these Greek concepts to the Middle Ages unchanged. Other concepts were poorly understood and survived only after being adapted to the musical practice of Gregorian chant. Still, others were forgotten altogether until their rediscovery by the great Renaissance humanist scholars of the 15th and 16th centuries. See chapter 6.